Hi everyone, this is Richard. In this video we are going to continue our talk about classes. I'm going to talk a little bit about the theory of the classes, and it may not make a lot of sense right now, but it will be important for later on. You have to understand how things work if you're going to actually make some of these classes and these programs yourself. Because if you don't, and you just start going through the motions themselves, you may run into some problems later and you will pull your hair out trying to figure out why the computer is doing what it's doing. Okay, so if we look at this and we said print mycake.eggs, that basically says I am accessing this this string, But when you think about it itself, what I mentioned before is this should be a method, right? A method upon the object myCake. So why am I actually using a string, accessing a string? Well, I'm actually not accessing it directly, okay? I'm accessing it through what we call a getter method. So inherently built into all classes are getters, setters, and constructors. So why is this important? Well, if we remember something like string a equals hello there, and then we said print a dot length, right? Length is actually a method that returns the value of, I don't know, what's the length of that? 11. It returns the value of 11. Just like methods here return, this one returns the concatenation of eggs and water, length returns the value of the length of the string. Okay, so it's the same thing here. When I write eggs, I'm not actually directly accessing the variable. I'm actually going through a getter method that is labeled eggs, and it returns the value of eggs itself. Now, you might be thinking, what's the big deal? It is a big deal because we can change this in the future, and as time goes by, you might run into problems where you should be able to access the variable, but you can't. And that's because we're not going through the getter method itself. Okay? So just understand that theory for right now. It may not make too much sense, but hopefully it will in the future. The same thing is true for weight of cake. You're going through the getter method, mycake.weightofcake, which will return an integer. Okay? Then there is something called a setter method, again, built into every class itself, where you can actually reassign some values. mycake.eggs equals duck eggs. Okay, so even though it has chicken eggs here, you can reassign the value through the getter method, the setter method itself. Okay, so this reassigns, this method reassigns. The setter method, reassigns this value to this integer, this string. Then there is a constructor for every class, and again, we can change these in the future, but for right now, all classes, no matter how complex or simple they are, have what we call a constructor method. Oh, by the way, so if you think about this, if you think about the options, the methods here are on equal par, are the same thing as the data, the instance variables here. That's because it's going through a method, remember? The getter method. So mix will be a method, eggs will also be a method. Just to clarify that. I think that's completely clear. The constructor basically allows you to get the class and turn it into an object. Okay, so anytime you get a class and you turn it into an object, you're going through the constructor method itself. When you do that, you create what we call an instance object. So when people will say instance objects, they'll just call it objects, instance of a class. So when they make those comments, what they're basically saying is that you created an actual object from the blueprint or the recipe that was the class itself. Okay, just definitions. As you read and time goes by, you will run across a lot of these terminologies. That's why I always am a stickler. Let's get the terminology down, except for function and methods. Again, those are interchangeable. But when people talk about objects, and you may start getting, what does that mean? That's what they're actually talking about. Okay? Oh, one last thing. When we talked about the difference between functions and methods, people will say methods are functions in object when it's related to an object or in object oriented, okay? In an object oriented language. So again, because we have a class, a function inside of there is a method, and that is related to object oriented programming, okay? Just wanted to throw that in. Hopes that helps. We'll keep going on as the next few talks go by.